Hello, and welcome to the Death Penalty Focus webinar, Lethal Injection Lies. I'm Mary Kate DeLuco, a communications consultant with Death Penalty Focus, and I'm joined by Yoko Otani-Sperlin, Finance and Business Administrator at Death Penalty Focus behind the scenes. I will introduce DPF President Mike Farrell shortly, but first I'd like to acknowledge our co-sponsors for this webinar. And you can see their logos here on our screen. We have 10 co-sponsors for which we're very grateful. Like DPF, all of our co-sponsors are dedicated to ending the death penalty and creating a more fair and just system. And we believe that working all together, we are going to succeed. So thank you for being here, and thank you to our co-sponsors. I'd like to introduce now our president, Death Penalty Focus President, Mike Farrell. Mike joins us and will introduce our panelists. Mike.
Thank you, ma'am. Good day to all of you. I want to thank you all for joining us. My name, as it was just suggested, is Mike Farrell. I'm the president of the board of directors of Death Penalty Focus. Our mission at DPF is to educate and inform the public about the fact that state killing has no place in a civilized society. We believe death penalty should be abolished in America, as it has been in most of the developed nations of today's world. And I have to say, it's sometimes hard for me. I've been at this for over 40 years now. It's hard for me to control the anger I feel at the grotesque abuses of which people in charge of the criminal justice system are capable. Today, a former president is on a rant about more killing and faster killing, firing squad, the guillotine, just kill, attempting to appeal to the worst in all of us. We've had the death penalty in this country since its founding, but as we've grown and matured, there's been a struggle to rationalize state killing in a society that, unlike the monarchy from which we separated ourselves, is based on the premise that we are all equal. Attempting, as we've matured, to find a way to kill that is painless and humane has brought us from hanging and firing squads to the electric chair, the gas chamber, and today lethal injection as an attempt to present a medicalized and thus more acceptable version of state killing. But painless, humane, not so much. Our panelists today have expertise in that area. You've had a chance to read a bit about them. My friend Dale Baich was for 26 years the federal public defender operating out of Arizona, representing his team, represented almost 100 condemned inmates. He personally witnessed 15 executions and experienced the personal cost of which I can barely imagine. One of them was the horrifying, excruciating ordeal of Joseph Woods, who suffered 2 hours of torture on the gurney due to the state's use of an experimental drug cocktail. Dr. Philip Hansten taught the philosophy of science and drug interactions at the University of Washington. Himself a prolific author, we came in contact when he sent me a new book, wondering if his approach to such a serious subject was perhaps a little impertinent. I read his book, Death Penalty Bullshit, 15 Absurd Claims of Death Penalty Supporters, and welcomed him to the family. Professor Corinna Lain has taught at Virginia's University of Richmond School of Law for the past 21 years. Over the past 16 years, she's focused on the death penalty, writing and speaking at national and international conferences. Then, concentrating on lethal injection for the past 10 years, she's been published in our nation's top law journals and cited by the Supreme Court. She has generously shared with me, some chapters of a book she's now finishing entitled Secrets of the Killing State, The Untold Story of Lethal Injection. The book is going to be stunning. So let me begin with our expert. Dale, as a public defender, you led the federal litigation that established and continually revised execution protocols in Arizona and other states. I don't know how you were able to witness the execution of your clients, the cost of which, as I said, is got to be emotionally terribly draining. and especially the awfully botched killing of Joseph Wood in 2014. But bless you for it, my friend. So you know firsthand what a lethal injection execution looks like and how inadequate even the best protocol can be. I have to say, in my view, there is no way to kill another human being painlessly and humanely. Is that a fair thing to say?
It is, and thank you for the invitation today, Mike. I'm looking forward to the discussion. In my view, the most humane way to carry out the death sentence is old age. Life without parole is a death sentence, and I think to the point you made in your introduction, we need to do away with the death penalty, and life without parole is an option. Just yesterday, we saw in Oklahoma a poll that was released. It said 51% of people in Oklahoma think life without parole is a better option. But as you noted, I've witnessed 15 executions. 14 were by lethal injection, and I remember each one of them. There was something unique and very sobering about watching the state take a life. I remember Michael Buki in Ohio praying the rosary as his last words, or Robert Towery in 2012 in Arizona, talking to me in code and explaining what the executioners did to him before the curtains were opened. And then finally, the Joe Wood execution in Arizona in 2014, and I've never seen anything like that. It was just surreal to see a man strapped to a table, gasping and gulping and struggling to breathe for nearly 2 hours. So I think we've learned a lot as lawyers and as scientists over the years about lethal injection. And you're right. It's not humane the way the state would try and have us believe.
Yeah. Thanks, Dale. And again, bless you for the work you do. Corinna, you wrote in an essay that Americans might disagree over the death penalty, but they don't disagree over whether the government should be torturing people to death, per Dale's recent comment. As you believe that lethal injection is torture, but a majority of Americans, a small majority, and shrinking every year, but still a majority, support the death penalty. Can we believe that they're unaware of how inhumane lethal injection executions actually are? And if so, do you think enlightening the public would lead to increased opposition to the death penalty in the United States?
That's a great question. And I also just want to say I'm so happy to be a part of this panel, and thanks so much for the invitation. And it's an honor to be here beside Phil and Dale, and you, of course, talking about this issue. So yeah, I actually believe that lethal injection is in some ways the poison pill, no pun intended, but I guess, pardon the pun, but, for the death penalty. And, at first glance, you think it's really odd to be talking about how we kill as opposed to whether we should kill and that we shouldn't kill. But, I think that lethal injection could be one of the things that actually brings the death penalty down. And I say that for three reasons that go to your question. The first is this, sort of where we are right now with the death penalty. As you say, Mike, a majority of Americans still support it, but that majority is really small. So the last Gallup poll, which was last fall, 2022, said death penalty support was 55%. And it's been ranging between 54 and 56% for the last 6 years. And that is a 50-year low. We haven't seen numbers that low since the 1970s. So, yes, it's a majority, but barely. And we're headed towards a tipping point. And, I think there might be a small portion of those people that are like, yes, torture them because of what they did. But I think it's very small. I think most people would be horrified at how what states are doing. And I think if you ask most people, it would not be okay to be torturing people, which is exactly what we're doing. And I know Dale is going to talk a little bit more about this, but I'll just mention there was a 2020 NPR study. They looked at over 200 autopsies by lethal injection across all different protocols and found that 84% of them, people are dying by pulmonary edema. So they're drowning on their own fluids. We're essentially waterboarding people to death. And I think if people knew that I just have to believe, I do believe, and I have to believe that that's not okay, that the public would not be okay with that. And to Dale's point, by the way, I agree, like if you think about it, killing is violent. It's ending someone's life before they're naturally ready is violent. I remember reading a doctor that said, the heart stops reluctantly. And I've always remembered that the heart stops reluctantly, like there is a will to live. And so to end life before it's ready, it's violence. And it's just a question of where's the violence going to go? And with lethal injection hides the violence. But, very briefly, I will say, as far as like lethal injection being the thing that could help take the death penalty down, one reason is public opinion, as I just mentioned, but a second one is that lethal injection is having the opposite effect of what it was supposed to do. Like, I think lethal injection was designed, I really believe this, so that people wouldn't think about the death penalty, out of sight, out of mind, right? People are supposed to like just drift, quietly into the night. But lethal injection, it's loud and it's causing controversy and it's bringing unwanted attention to the death penalty. And it's not just unwanted attention, it's really bad publicity. And it's showing all the things that I know Dale could talk about on the ground of just how bad the state is. Revelations that really raise the question of whether the state should be killing, even if you think people deserve the death penalty. And then the last thing I'll just mention to you is, and this is something I think people don't think much about, but lethal injection has inadvertently brought new allies into the abolitionist war with the death penalty itself. And that's something I didn't see coming. I don't think anyone else saw coming. And you think about like European abolitionists, they've been trying to get us to stop the death penalty for decades. And now they're like, oh, wait, you mean all we have to do to bring the death penalty to its knees is stop selling our drugs? Okay, fine, done. But, it's also lethal injection has picked a fight with the medical profession. And it's not just about like doctors, and the Hippocratic Oath. It's, the medical profession is really, really angry that lethal injection is, scarfing off of its white coat to do something that's very perverse to the profession. And pharmaceutical companies and good government groups, like all of these people that maybe aren't against the death penalty are now really, really upset. And it's lethal injection actually that has done all of that. So I think there's a lot of potential that people don't realize. And I know it feels perverse to be like, focus on lethal injection if you want to end the death penalty itself, but there's a lot of power here. So.
Thanks very much for that. Phil, in an interview in our January newsletter, you referred to the recent investigation of Tennessee's lethal injection protocol and described your reaction to it as being appalled for many reasons. But chief among them, you felt, was the lack of formal medical training of those on the execution team. Can it be true that these people are mixing and preparing drug cocktails, injecting the individuals strapped to a gurney, often performing complicated procedures like cut downs with little or no medical training? As a trained pharmacologist, how do you know the medical training that should be in place before these procedures go forward?
Well, thank you, Mike. And again, like the other speakers said, thank you so much for assembling this group. I'm in awe of the other people here, including you. I'm bringing coals to Newcastle here because I'm going to focus on more the scientific aspects of it. But yes, absolutely. There are all these people practicing pharmacy without a license, practicing medicine without a license, and conducting things that they have absolutely no training to do, or maybe they've had 10 minutes of training. And so it's small wonder that things go awry when this goes on. So and there are reasons why it is so problematic. And if you allow me to show just 5 minutes of slides, I can show from a scientific standpoint why it's so problematic to try to kill people using medications. We practice this ahead of time, and I think I can show. Do you see a syringe on the screen? Am I
Yes,
coming
indeed.
through? Okay. So why is it so problematic? Well, part of the problem is this astonishing variability, and both Dale and Corinna talked about the problems that have occurred in the botched executions. Well, part of the reason for that is from a scientific standpoint. Drug response is astonishingly variable from one person to another. Part of that is, and I apologize for showing this, part of that is drug receptors. These GPCRs represent about a third of the drugs we use employ these receptors for their activity. These receptors have increased or decreased activity depending on genetics and drugs they're taking and all sorts of other things. And tamoxifen, which is a drug used for breast cancer. Again, look at all those enzymes that are involved in the metabolism of tamoxifen. So small wonder that because of all the variability in those enzymes and transporters, you see a lot of variability in how people respond to drugs. So that's one big problem. And the other problem is that, and I know that many of you have dealt with this. I know Corinna and Dale have dealt with this already. And that is that when barbiturates, which actually can cause unconsciousness and even death with a high enough dose, when they became unavailable or very hard to get, some genius came up with the idea of using midazolam as an alternative. And midazolam, it acts on the same receptors as the barbiturates, but in a qualitatively different way. And so it has a plateau. So it doesn't matter how much midazolam you give somebody. And that's what they say, oh, well, we give a huge amount. Well, it doesn't matter how much you give because it plateaus out. And you get, in almost everybody, all you get is sedation rather than unconsciousness. So then when you give the other drugs, this is where the torture comes in. That when you give the paralytic and the potassium chloride, you're torturing them even though they are not unconscious. And the degree of sedation also is highly variable depending on midazolam. And I won't go into all the reasons for these things, but it's highly variable depending on a whole host of factors, including down in the lower right there, inducers. And a lot of drugs are CYP3A4 inducers and drastically reduce midazolam response. And then they've tried other things. Nebraska tried diazepam and fentanyl, really a very ill-advised combination of drugs to use. This 3A4 enzyme I talked about, if that's increased for whatever reason from drugs or anything else, there's a dramatic reduction in the effect of both of them. With fentanyl, it may completely obliterate the effect of fentanyl if they're on one of these drugs. And probably the worst example of a lethal injection protocol ever devised in the history of the world was used by Arizona and Ohio, where they used midazolam and hydromorphone. We already talked about midazolam, but hydromorphone uses a different enzyme. But if that is increased, what is a double whammy? What happens is the hydromorphone effect is reduced substantially, but it increases the production of a toxic metabolite that increases the pain threshold and can cause seizures. So, I mean, an absolutely preposterous combination of drugs, but they're just experimenting. They just try things out and see if it works. So they're doing experiments on these prisoners just to see if it will kill them. And then they say, well, it doesn't matter because these people made their victims suffer, so we can. They're so evil that we can kill them in a way that is torture. And they paint a picture like that guy with the chainsaw, saying, "Well, these are the people that we're torturing to death." Well, actually not. There are 4 big problems with that, and I'll finish with this. First of all, should we lower ourselves to their level? We don't rape rapists or burn down the houses of arsonists. So I would say society shouldn't lower ourselves to that level. Many on death row are not heinous killers. They paint this picture of the worst, but it's just simply not the case. These 3 serial killers killed almost 150 people, or maybe more than 150 people between them. They got life in prison. Nathaniel Woods didn't kill anyone, and he was executed in 2020. Somebody else in the house shot the police that were coming through. He didn't even touch the gun, and he was executed. So don't tell me it's only the worst of the worst that we do that to. We execute people who are truly rehabilitated, and even the pleas of people within the prison system who tried to plead that Scotty Morrow get life in prison without parole instead of being executed. They said, nope, we're going to execute him anyway. And then finally, we execute people who are factually innocent. Almost 200 people have been exonerated and released from death row. And this, of course, doesn't count all of the innocent people who are still sitting on death row, who will either be executed or die of natural causes before they can be executed. And Adam Smith, 300 years ago, talked about this, the unfathomable cruelty of executing innocent people. An innocent man brought to the scaffold by the false imputation of an infamous or odious crime suffers the most cruel misfortune which is possible to suffer. And in one of the best books ever written on the death penalty, Arthur Kessler said, innocent men have been hanged in the past, will be hanged in the future, unless either the death penalty is abolished or the fallibility of human judgment is abolished. Now, we're not making very good progress on that second one. And this is the last slide. Because the same people that are deciding on who gets the death penalty and who doesn't are the same people that have to be advised not to cook chicken in NyQuil. So we're probably not going to get around to solving the problem of human fallibility. So, okay, I will stop my screen share. So that's just a very quick thumbnail of why it is so problematic from a scientific standpoint to try to kill people with drugs.
And it's a very, very impressive one. Corinna, you've written about this business of the training of those who are doing the lethal injections as well. You want to add something to this, to what Phil has had to say?
Training? What training? I mean, I mean, seriously, I was thinking about the botched Lockett execution. And was thinking that, so after the execution, there was this independent, it wasn't an independent evaluation, but it was probably the most thorough investigation that we're ever going to see. And they end up asking the executioners, so, you know, what kind of training did you have? And they said, yeah, we were told to call so-and-so and meet him 10 minutes beforehand, and that's it. And it's like, wait, what? You know, I think going back to your point, Mike, that people, ordinary people, on good people on both sides of the aisle, I think, assume that it's doctors doing this and that it's, you know, people who are trained. Not so, you know, and to the extent that it is doctors, and I have to concede, because of the secrecy around it, we don't always know who it is. We have a pretty good idea, and we have a good idea of their training, very good idea of their training. You know, but even when it's a doctor, so Missouri was using a doctor that had over 20 malpractice suits against him. He had lost his hospital privileges at two hospitals. He said, you know, sometimes I mix up numbers. I know I'm mixing up. I know I mix the drugs and administer them. Sometimes I get my numbers mixed up because I'm dyslexic. He came back and said, I'm not dyslexic, but I just mix up numbers. But like, it's terrifying. What they, what the training is on these folks. And I'll just add, most people are shocked to find out that the people who are actually pushing the plungers, those are not medical people at all. Those are guards. Those are guards who at most are being told, okay, push it a little slower, like they're being talked through it, but it is completely, no medical training whatsoever are the people pushing the plungers. And, doctors who find this out, they're just like, that is unfathomable. That is below any reasonable standard of, forget care, but like any reasonable standard of anything. And none of that, by the way, takes into account the fact that there's no fitness requirements. And so the stories are legion about executioners who have been disciplined for cruelty, who well, there's one in California, actually, where the federal district court said that the very executioners, like there was a bunch of barbiturates that were disappeared, and the judge said there should be an investigation. There was another member of the team that was caught smuggling drugs into the facility. Like this is, the one point that this goes to, and I know Dale could talk so much about this, certainly Phil too, but it goes to the indifference, just the utter indifference to incompetence. Like, maybe we're just well past this because we're killing people on purpose with people filing into a room to watch. Like when you think about it, it's like, that is so gross. But, the indifference and incompetence is just stunning.
Dale, you've now had to deal with the laws in a number of different states, and I'm sort of staggered by the fact that we still have 2 states in the union, I believe, that don't require a unanimous verdict on the part of the jury for a death sentence. But there's a man to be killed today who had 4 members of the jury say that he should not be killed. And in fact, the judge overrode that and sentenced him to death. And that execution will take place today unless the Supreme Court acts.
Yes, and that's a really good point, because what we see in some states is that they want to make sure and write the rules in a way that favor the state, so that even if the jury recommends life, a judge could override that. We've seen that a lot in Florida, where juries have come back recommending life, and the judge says nope, and that goes to show how politics come into play with the death penalty. People think about, this is all about justice. No, it's all about politics. The decision to seek the death penalty is made by the most powerful person in the county, and that's the district attorney or the county attorney or the prosecuting attorney. He or she has discretion whether to seek the death penalty in a given case. And I think the slide that Phil put up earlier about the serial killers versus someone who didn't pull the trigger shows how political these decisions are. And if I may just briefly, in Arizona, medical doctors have been used to carry out executions and they didn't get it right. And we were able to depose executioners, including the physician executioners in some of our litigation. And we learned that the doctor was paid $18,000 in cash to carry out an execution. So even if you bring medical personnel into it, it still goes wrong.
If not illegal, that is certainly ill-advised in terms of the American Medical Association, isn't it? That doctors take part in an execution.
It is, but in Arizona, and I'm sure in other states, the doctors and other professionals are protected because in the statutes that govern executions, the legislatures have said that a license cannot be suspended or revoked for participating in an execution.
So, Phil, maybe you're the right one to ask, I'm not sure. This whole question of the lack of training on the part of the teams that are doing these executions. I've read a couple of instances and one description in one of actually in I think one of the chapters of your book I read, Corinna, but can you describe for me what the cut down process means and when it arrives for one of you, or maybe both of you can speak to that?
Well, it's often very difficult, as Dale and Corinna know better than I do. It's often very difficult to gain venous access to these people. They're former drug abusers. They have all sorts of diseases. They may be obese. I mean, there's all sorts of reasons for it, and that is not an easy process. Then to put in a central line is not an easy process. I've seen it done, and it's not easy to do. And with the lack of training, and by the way, the type of person, I hate to be to cast aspersions broadly, but the type of physician who gets involved in this, the type of pharmacist who, at a compounding pharmacy who supplies the drugs, the type of nurses tend not to be involved in this usually, but or EMTs, or the type of people that are health professionals that get involved in this tend not to be the best. And I already heard Corinna and Dale talk about that issue. And the other point is that with regard to the use of drugs, even when you have competent health professionals trying their best, we still end up with about 100,000 every year throughout the country, about 100,000 people severely injured or killed by drugs in the healthcare system. So even when everything is pushing to help the patient, mistakes are made. So it's not surprising that physicians don't always get it right. Even if they're qualified, they don't always get it right in an execution.
And Corinna, can you describe the process?
Yeah, I'll piggyback off of that. And I just have to say, Dale, I'm so interested in here. We'll have to talk offline about the physicians. I'm wondering if they are actually pushing the syringes too, or just setting up the vein, right? So it's just the correctional. Yeah. So, I mean, that's just crazy. But, you asked about the cut down, and as opposed to Phil, who actually knows this stuff, all of mine is book learning. But what I understand is, when you can't get a peripheral vein, which for all the reasons Phil explained, you can't often. So they have to go to these deeper central veins. And how do you do that? Well, you could either take a longer needle and try to actually get there. That's been a cause for numerous botches because they don't know what they're doing. Or you can actually cut the skin and expose that vein or get it close so that you can then, this is so gross, but then you can access the vein that way. It's a very, very bloody procedure. People don't know what they're doing. And so it's really quite terrible. But, I want to just say what I was thinking when Phil was talking is, lethal injection in some ways, and this sort of brings it home, but it's like, it's so hard. It's such a stupid idea if you think about it, right? It's like, of all the ways, if one were going to go about this, these are the people who have terrible veins, terrible veins from years of drug use. So like the notion that that's the way we're going to do this is really tough. And then, you know, the drug suppliers that they don't want to sell their drugs. You know, Pfizer's corporate motto is like drugs for life. It's like, really? Like, they don't want to sell their drugs. The medical community, like, it's so hard. And it's so, you know, these states are pushing a rock uphill. They can't get anybody to tell them how to do it. And so you've got lawyers doing Google searches. True. You know, like, that's actual truth. And so it's like so hard, and it makes you wonder, why are they, you know, why are they sticking with this? It's so hard and so inappropriate in so many ways. And I think it goes back to the fact that lethal injection is special. Lethal injection does something that no other method does. It hides state killing. It hides what the state is actually doing. And it's like, man, that must be awfully important for states to be pushing as hard as they are, and, you know, writing false prescriptions, and, you know, getting sued for breach of contract, and, you know, violating federal and state laws. Like, there's all of these things, and yet they do it. And I think it's because lethal injection hides it, and the states know, if you start showing people what is really happening here, the death penalty is going to go away. We're too close. You know, there's enough people that just are like, oh, if that's what it's about, then I don't want anything to do with it.
Mhm. So medically untrained people are using a scalpel or a knife or whatever's around to open the flesh of a person when they can't get access to a vein. They're opening the flesh, and you're dealing with blood and all of this contaminating material.
I just want to make sure I'm clear. I think the only place that medical people are involved is accessing the vein. So I think the Department of Corrections guards are the ones pushing the syringes, but I don't think, correct me if I'm wrong, Dale and Phil, but I don't think they're the ones that are actually doing the cut downs. But it could be a paramedic, you know, it could be like a medical technician as opposed to somebody trained in cut downs. Yep.
Well, I remember reading, and I'm not sure which state I was reading about, but there was a story of just that. The person, the inmate who was involved with the procedure, said that this person who was brought in to do this doesn't know what he's doing. So this is in order to make it acceptable to the public, to make it look medicalized, we have created this horror show where people are being tortured to death, and the public, to get to the point earlier, the public really doesn't know that, really doesn't understand it, although it's becoming more and more, it seems to me, it's becoming more and more known. There's another issue that I'd like to touch on just for a second, and that is, in Oklahoma, perhaps you can help me, Dale, the official in charge, whether it's the district attorney or the attorney general or whatever they called it in Oklahoma, set up a schedule that within 2 years they were going to execute 23, I would think it was, people. And that process was going to be once a month. And the former person who held that office wrote a letter that included the following. He said, if even a routine execution can inflict lasting harm on corrections staff, the traumatic impact of a botched execution is exponentially worse. He said, Oklahoma has experienced this harm on multiple occasions, and should not needlessly place its hardworking correctional staff at risk of another such mistake. We're beginning to see more and more representations of people saying, I can't do this. I don't want to take part in this. It's doing no good and a great deal of harm. Have any of you had experiences, either personally in your case, Dale, or in the others, in the research you've done to help understand that?
Well, what we learned from Oklahoma is starting in 2014 with the Lockett execution that Corinna mentioned, and then that was severely botched, followed by the state using the wrong drugs to execute Charles Warner, and then almost using the wrong drugs to execute Richard Glossop. The state then puts a pause in place and says, we need to do a top to bottom review. And after 5 years, they come up with the same protocol that they used in the past. And as I mentioned earlier, the death penalty isn't about fairness and justice, it's about politics. And former Attorney General John O'Connor, running for re-election in a primary, asked for 24 execution dates, which was crazy. And the new Attorney General who came in heard from corrections staff, heard from former corrections staff, met with the victim's family and said, hey, we can't keep up at this pace. We're hurting people who work for the Department of Corrections. The victims are harmed in the process as well. And fortunately, the court agreed and set a different schedule, I think every other month rather than every month. But what that did was it gave people in Oklahoma, and we saw this at the press conference yesterday, a reason, another reason to ask for a moratorium to be placed in effect in Oklahoma.
A moratorium again. I read something just recently. Ron McAndrew, the former warden in Florida, said, I helped Florida transition to lethal injection. Unfortunately, I soon learned that while lethal injection executions look more peaceful to the witnesses on the other side of the glass, it is just as traumatizing for those of us whose job it is to end the prisoner's life. He said, the reality is that even when things go smoothly on the surface, the process of killing another human being is traumatic for those involved. If things go awry, the harm is far worse. I still have nightmares and flashbacks from my participation in executions. I also saw the damage executions caused my staff, and not only those who worked directly on execution teams, but many others throughout the prison system. Some of my colleagues, he said, spoke openly about the trauma they experienced, while others remained silent. As the warden, I became well aware of the impacts, including substance abuse, domestic troubles, depression, and even suicide. Some left correctional work altogether. Now, as I understand it, lethal injection is the primary method by which people are executed in America today, in the killing states that remain. And yet we are not only failing to do the job, if you want to call it a job, appropriately in terms of the people who are being victimized, but also by causing great mental and emotional stress to the people who are actually required to do the killing. And I find this whole idea ghastly. And yet, hopefully, as you begin to expose the failings in the lethal injection system, it will, as you suggested, Corinna, drop the veil a little bit so that people will be less likely to accept this notion that this can happen quietly and humanely and fairly. I'm sort of captured here by this idea that one of the founders of the United States, one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence, a man by the name of Rush, a Dr. Rush, also ran the Pennsylvania Prison Project, and he said that he opposed the death penalty, as he opposed slavery and a number of other things. He opposed the death penalty because he said it brutalizes everyone associated with it, not just the people who are dying, being killed, but the people who are doing the killing. And I think that's an incredibly important thing to remember for all of us who are involved in this process, that the damage that's being done is stretching out not only to the judges and the juries and the prosecutors, but to the citizens of a country that allow it, to the people who acknowledge, who don't speak up against it. In this society, silence gives consent. So we, I think, have to continue to raise the banner of fairness and honesty and honor and trust and faith and all the things that we want to believe that our country is practicing and is capable of advancing and honoring, and yet we continue to pretend that we're not torturing people to death, as you've said, Corinna, that we're not killing the innocent, as you know, Dale, that we're not destroying health-giving and helpful industries and practices, as you know, Phil. It seems to me that we're on the precipice of really coming to a wonderful understanding and freeing ourselves from this, or just falling deeper and deeper into a hole of lying and pretending and usurping every concept of honor and dignity that we continue to pray we hold on to. If there's something that you could tell everybody in the country, Dale, what would about why they shouldn't be doing this, what would it be?
Well, it's lethal injection doesn't work, and the death penalty doesn't work. It's that simple. It's a false promise to the citizens.
How about you, Phil?
Well, I would focus on what you were just talking about, Mike, and that is the brutalization of society. What the death penalty does is create the idea that if somebody does something you don't like, that you can kill them to stop it. And that is possibly one of the reasons why the states that have the death penalty have a higher murder rate. And that's perhaps why the countries around the world that have stopped the death penalty, the murder rate never, ever went up. And it usually went down when they stopped the death penalty. So it's, I think the main thing, or one of the main issues I would like to bring up is what you talked about, Mike, and that's the brutalization of our society.
Corinna?
I was thinking about that. What would I say? I would go to Dale's point that he had made, which is support for the death penalty is support in the abstract. It's about the political uses. All of the criminologists have told us that. And the lethal injection keeps the death penalty abstract. It allows the political uses to flourish without drawing attention to this brutalization and dirty, dirty work that executions entail. And so what I would say, I think you have just a ton of viewers today, which is amazing. I just want to say to all of them, pass it on, tell people. because I'm an optimist. I have a great hope that if people know about this, it's not okay. And it will help us really think. I think the death penalty is doing a lot of work in making us not think about the brutalization that it is. And that's where we need to go. So we need to get rid of it. And lethal injection too.
You know, you just made me think of something. I do a lot of speaking and have done a lot of speaking around the country and around the world, actually, in different areas on this subject. And what you just said, Corinna, I think, and you've all sort of implied the same thing. I was once asked to come to Oklahoma to help an attorney friend of mine get a meeting with the governor to stop an execution of a young man named Robin Parks because he believed that the man was not properly convicted and that the evidence indicated that he did not commit the crime as he was convicted of. I went and we implored the governor, and he did not agree to intervene. And it was the day of the execution. So we went to McAllister prison. And just to tell Robin that we had tried and failed. And he was quite gracious, quite extraordinary, I thought. And we did the thing on the glass and he walked away, and they killed him. And the next day, I got a call from one of the investigators the lawyer, I guess, who had been right with him up until the end. And he said, please tell Mike Farrell, I said, thank you for showing up. And what you've just said, Corinna, I think is that it's what we all need to tell the people of this country. You've got to show up. You've got to show up. You've got to let it be known that this cannot go forward in your name. That there is no proper executing. There is no fair killing. Killing hurts everybody. And the lethal injection process is maybe the worst aspect of this system, because it pretends to be something other than what it is. I'm sorry to insert that personal note, but that's what your mention of showing up brings to mind for me. I can't tell you how much I thank you, Corinna and Phil and Dale, for the work you've done, for the work you're continuing to do, and for the efforts you have made to contribute your experience and your understanding to this discussion, because it's something that is, I think, indicative of the death of everything we believe that this country is about, if we don't stop thinking that it's somehow okay to kill our fellow citizens. People, of course, some people need to be separated from society, but to think that we can kill people, medicalized or otherwise, easily, fairly, without wounding ourselves and harming everything we believe, I think is a simple falsehood. If you have any closing comment, I'm sure the audience would like to hear it.
Well, I'll jump in and just say, I'm the one that reads about Dale's work, and I'm the one that is learning from Phil. I'm a researcher. But to have somebody who's actually doing boots on the ground work, I just want to say, like, Dale, thank you for the things that you're doing for the least of these, right? And Phil, Also, I love your book. Everyone should get your book, Death Penalty Bullshit. I was actually reading parts of it to my husband at home, but that medical side, I just am absorbing. And in that way, I'm kind of like you, Mike, right? Like I'm a believer, but I'm absorbing what these other people that I'm with have actually done and their expertise. So I'll just say it's an honor to be here.
Well, I just want to say that there are many lawyers across the country who are doing this very hard and noble work, and they need to be recognized as well. And Mike, I can't thank you enough for all that you've done for some of my clients and what you've done for the movement. You're an inspiration and a hero.
Thank you.
I want to echo that and just say that I'm the junior member here. All Bill and Mike and Corinna are the real heroes here, and I'm a Johnny come lately. I've been working on this for maybe 8 or 9 years, and all of you have been doing this for much longer. And also, 70% of the royalties for the book go to Death Penalty Focus. So that's one other point.
Bless you for that. And, for those who are listening and watching, it doesn't matter when you started. What you need to do is.
Yeah.
I can't thank you enough for your time, Corinna and Phil and Dale, and for everything you've done. The contributions you've made to this extraordinary effort are beyond my ability to describe, and how grateful I am for it and how meaningful it is. Thank you for taking your time.